They didn't burn his body. They embalmed it. Not to honor him, but to preserve the horror. Not the crown, nor the hand that signed death warrants, but the thing beneath the silk sheets. The thing that whispered more about his reign than any throne ever could. It was the year 1834. The royal palace of Castellanova lay cloaked in a heavy silence, broken only by the low murmur of servants and the distant tolling of bells. King Aurelius IV had just died, a monarch whose name struck fear and commanded obedience in equal measure. Yet, in these final moments, the most unsettling request came not from the dying king himself, but from his queen, Isabella of Lens. Through tears barely held in check, she summoned the palace physician with an order that would chill any sane man to the bone. "Preserve it, doctor. Preserve it for posterity. Not his heart, not his mind, but something far more grotesque, a secret that the monarchy had buried beneath layers of velvet, lies, and silence. This is not a story of legacy or glory. It is a story of what legacy conceals, the monstrous truths lurking behind gilded crowns. What was wrong with King Aurelius IV? And what does his grotesque anatomy reveal about the sickness of power itself? Before we strip away the velvet to expose the rot beneath, remember, your support keeps these truths alive. Like, share, and subscribe to Untold Legacy. Every comment unearths one more secret history waiting to be told. King Aurelius IV was not struck down by divine wrath, nor was he marked by fate's cruel hand. His curse was more insidious, a silent poison passed down through generations, hidden beneath the pomp of royal bloodlines. Centuries of relentless inbreeding, a twisted web of uncle to niece and cousin to cousin marriages, had woven a tapestry of genetic damage that no amount of ceremony or decree could mask. This was a dynasty obsessed with purity of blood, blind to the slow decay festering within its very core. From this diseased lineage emerged Aurelius, a child born not merely into royalty, but into a legacy of deformity and dysfunction. His body bore the unmistakable marks of a family that had sacrificed humanity on the altar of heredity. The kingdom whispered, but never spoke aloud. The king's most intimate parts were grotesquely malformed, a monstrous anomaly hidden behind velvet curtains and royal etiquette. The court, an arena of whispers and shadows, recoiled in silence. Noblemen and ladies spoke in cautious tones, their eyes flickering with a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. The king's deformity was a secret too shameful to utter, yet impossible to ignore. Servants stole furtive glances, unable to unsee what the royal physicians documented in their private journals. Descriptions so surreal they read like the ramblings of a madman, rather than the careful notes of men sworn to preserve life and dignity. The physicians' writings revealed an organ that defied all laws of nature and medicine. It was not a symbol of royal virility, as tradition demanded, but a grotesque biological tyrant, oversized, misshapen, and unpredictable. Their words painted a chilling picture, an appendage so distorted that sexual intercourse became a dangerous, even torturous ordeal. This was not power, it was a prison forged in flesh. As Aurelius grew, the palace adapted. Workshops crafted custom cushions and supports, furniture not for comfort but for necessity, designed to hold and protect the king's monstrous deformity. These accommodations were hidden behind closed doors, but they spoke volumes about the man who ruled Spain, a king, burdened not only by crown and throne, but by a body that betrayed him. The women chosen to marry him were selected with grim pragmatism. Beauty, grace, and intelligence were secondary to an unspoken but ruthless criterion: physical resilience. Prospective brides were examined, not just as partners in alliance, but as vessels expected to endure the impossible. The wedding chamber transformed into a site of preparation and dread, where royal artisans crafted devices euphemistically called marital aids to mitigate the pain and danger posed by the king's anatomy. Among these women was Isabella of Lens, a 16-year-old noblewoman, the very picture of youthful hope and naivety. Betrothed to Aurelius as part of a political alliance, she dreamed of a future bathed in light, a princess destined to become queen, to bear heirs and secure the dynasty's future. She was told stories of regal grandeur, whispered of romance and duty, shielded from the horrifying reality that awaited her behind palace walls. The wedding night was no fairy tale. The grand chamber, decked in silk and candlelight, soon became a theater of anguish. Oil-slicked cushions were arranged with the precision of a surgeon's tools. Laudanum, a potent opiate, was administered to Isabella not to ease passion, but to numb the agony about to unfold. The king, already haunted by shame and paranoia, entered the chamber carrying not the promise of love, but the weight of a bodily curse. The moment shattered illusions. What transpired was less a consummation and more a brutal anatomical siege. Isabella's screams echoed through the palace, a piercing sound that shattered chandeliers and hearts alike. Servants later recounted the horror in hushed tones, a young bride overwhelmed by pain, terror, and betrayal. Lady Mariana, one of Isabella's ladies-in-waiting, would write years later in a secret memoir, "Her Majesty's scream was unlike any I had heard raw, unfiltered, a cry that seemed to rend the very air. She recoiled as if from a monster, pointing and wailing, 'Monster! Monster!' The king's condition was the kingdom's darkest secret, a taboo wrapped in velvet and silence. Physicians scrambled to devise remedies, inventing devices and concocting potions in desperate attempts to normalize the unnatural. Mechanical cushions, harnesses, and supports were fabricated with painstaking care. Alchemists and astrologers were summoned, offering elixirs and incantations to align the stars in favor of fertility and ease. Yet none could solve the fundamental problem, the genetic curse embedded in Aurelius' very flesh. Isabella's marriage quickly devolved into a ritual of endurance and despair. The royal bedchamber became a chamber of suffering, where medical precision replaced romance. Each encounter was a carefully orchestrated ordeal, involving mechanical supports and heavy sedation. Laudanum became her constant companion, dulling the pain but sharpening the isolation. Attempts to conceive an heir were equally tragic. 2 pregnancies ended in miscarriage, each loss a blow that fractured Isabella's spirit and further deepened Aurelius's paranoia. Instead of comfort, she found accusations, whispered suspicions that she was deliberately undermining their union. The king, consumed by his insecurities, believed his wife to be a conspirator against the dynasty itself. Behind closed doors, the royal court became a crucible of cruelty. Servants caught glimpses of the king's deformity, faced brutal punishments, disappearances, or exile. Nobles who dared to gossip or mock were stripped of titles or sent to distant, dangerous frontiers. Even those closest to the king lived in constant fear, caught between loyalty and survival. This was not merely the story of a man's body out of sync with nature. It was a portrait of a kingdom shackled by its own secrets, a monarchy that prioritized image over humanity. Aurelius IV's deformity was the symptom of a deeper rot, a dynasty unwilling to confront its own decay, choosing instead to preserve illusions at the cost of pain and silence. Isabella, once a hopeful bride, became a ghost in the palace halls, her health and spirit eroded by years of trauma, addiction, and isolation. Her tragic fate was a direct consequence of a king's monstrous anatomy, and the empire's refusal to acknowledge the human cost hidden beneath royal ceremony. In this story, the grotesque body of a monarch becomes a metaphor for corrupted power, swollen, misshapen, and ultimately destructive to all it touches. And the real horror is not the king's deformity, but the court's complicity in preserving the myth of invincible royalty at any cost. The pursuit of a royal heir was supposed to be the solemn duty of a king and queen, the sacred act that secured the future of a dynasty and the stability of a nation. But for King Aurelius IV and Queen Isabella of Lens, it became something grotesquely twisted, a ritualized assault hidden beneath the velvet drapes and gilded halls of Castelnuov's palace. What should have been an intimate union was instead a relentless cycle of physical agony, psychological torment, and cold calculation. Isabella entered her marriage full of hope, a young woman of 16 who believed she was becoming queen not only by title, but in spirit. She dreamed of love, lineage, and the promise of a future cradled in royal honor. Yet, the reality she faced was far darker than any whispered court rumor could prepare her for. The royal chamber where their marriage was to be consummated was transformed into something more akin to a surgical theater. Elaborate cushions were crafted not for comfort, but for containment, their shapes engineered to support Aurelius's monstrous deformity, while minimizing harm, though pain was inevitable. The queen was often restrained, bound by leather and silk harnesses fashioned by palace artisans, with a precision that spoke of cold necessity rather than warmth or desire. This was not love, this was endurance, a trial by flesh and silence. Laudanum, a potent opiate, became Isabella's grim companion, administered in increasing doses to dull the agonies inflicted by the king's grotesque anatomy. Her senses dulled, her will weakened, yet her body continued to bear the scars of each encounter. Bruises, tears, and internal wounds hidden beneath the finery, and the court's watchful eyes marked her physical decline. Every meeting was timed with merciless precision. Astrologers and mystics were summoned to cast horoscopes and chart celestial alignments, their arcane rituals adding a veneer of cosmic inevitability to a cycle of suffering. The king clung to these superstition-fueled hopes as desperately as he clung to his crown, believing that if the stars aligned, the curse might be lifted and the kingdom secured. But the stars held no mercy. Isabella's body faltered. Her womb, battered and fragile, could not sustain the hope that others placed upon it. 2 pregnancies, each a flicker of light in a sea of darkness, ended in heartbreaking miscarriages. The first loss was devastating, but hushed. The second was nearly fatal. Labor dragged on with excruciating cruelty, leaving Isabella broken, bloodied, and teetering on the edge of death. Official records were careful with words. The queen died of fever and complications arising from a delicate constitution, they said. Yet servants, those who moved unseen and unheard through palace corridors, knew the brutal truth. Isabella had bled out, her body a battlefield where nature and tyranny met with catastrophic results. Instead of solace, Isabella found suspicion. Aurelius, consumed by his own insecurities and paranoia, blamed her for the failures that were beyond her control. He branded her womb treasonous, accusing her of deliberate sabotage, whispering rumors of poison and betrayal. The queen who had suffered beyond measure was now cast as the enemy within. The king's paranoia spiraled. The royal apothecary, a man who had tended to Isabella's frail health and administered her laudanum, was executed under mysterious circumstances. His letters, potentially containing evidence of the queen's suffering and the king's condition, were burned in secret ceremonies, erased from history by loyalists eager to preserve the monarchy's fayad. Within weeks of Isabella's death, Aurelius's public mourning gave way to cold political expediency. He began seeking a new bridea woman, chosen not for affection or alliance, but for proven fertility. someone who could endure the brutal demands his malformed body required. Behind the throne, Aurelius was a monarch in name only. The man who ruled Spain had become a hollow shell of power and fear. His body source of his deepest shame dictated a reign marked by paranoia and cruelty. Guards and servants who glimpsed his naked form were not merely reprimanded. They were beaten, disappeared, or exiled to distant provinces where survival was uncertain. The palace corridors echoed with whispered tales of vanished courtiers. A young page, caught by chance in the king's private chambers, was never seen again. His disappearance remained shrouded in silence, a grim warning etched into the memories of those who served. The message was clear. Some secrets were worth killing for. Aurelius's paranoia was not without cause. His deformity was known among courtiers and foreign diplomats alike. But the king's response was disproportionate, a toxic blend of shame and rage that transformed his reign into a theater of cruelty. He compiled lists of suspected mockers, imagined conspiracies behind every whisper, and ordered retaliations that chilled even the most loyal nobles. His grotesque organ, once the source of whispered gossip, became a myth of masculine terror. It was no longer just a body part. It was a symbol of his fractured power, wielded as a weapon to intimidate and silence. The king ruled Spain much like he ruled his marriage, with an oversized brutality and an undersized capacity for mercy. In this twisted mirror, the monarchy itself was reflected, an institution swollen with arrogance and decay, hiding deformities beneath layers of gold and ceremony. Aurelius's reign was less about leadership and more about control, the desperate grasp of a man shackled by his own body and fears. The tragedy of King Aurelius IV and Queen Isabella of Lens is not just a story of physical deformity or royal scandal. It is a haunting portrait of how power, when fused with secrecy and shame, corrupts utterly. How the human cost of preserving a dynasty can be measured in broken bodies, shattered minds, and silenced voices. As the palace doors closed on Isabella's life, the kingdom stood witness to a reign that would be remembered not for glory, but for the monstrous truths lurking beneath its velvet faade. The tale of King Aurelius IV is not merely the story of a man's body warped by bloodlines or ill fate. It is a harsh illumination of a system and institution so invested in its own mythos that it willingly masks decay and deformity beneath layers of ritual, gold, and silence. Aurelius was the product of a lineage obsessed with purity, a dynasty that prioritized the appearance of unbroken power over the well-being of its people. Yet, the true tragedy lies not solely in the king's body or mind, but in the monstrous machinery of monarchy itself, the mechanism that enabled his suffering and silenced the suffering of others. Behind the gilded walls of Castellanova, the court bore witness to horrors that would never be spoken aloud. Physicians who carefully chronicled Aurelius' deformity sealed their findings in vaults, guarded by secrecy and fear. Isabella, the queen, was not a partner, but a victim, drugged into submission with laudanum, her screams muffled and erased by layers of opiate haze and political necessity. The palace did not protect its people. It protected the myth, the narrative of divine right, unchallenged authority, and the inviolability of royal blood. This system valued its own preservation above human life. The illusion of monarchy, the shimmering ideal of a sacred crown passed down through pure bloodlines, was deemed worth any cost. The agony of a single woman, the broken bodies and minds of many, the shattered lives hidden behind palace walls, these were mere collateral damage, sacrifices made at the altar of power. And so the question gnaws at us: are we truly so different today? Have we evolved beyond the complicit silence that allows power to fester beneath polished surfaces? Do we still preserve authority no matter the rot that lies beneath? Do we turn a blind eye to suffering when it threatens the narratives we cherish? We revere institutions draped in gold and tradition, sanctifying them with words like divine or inevitable, while ignoring the fractures hidden deep within. We elevate faces that wear crowns, but conceal the cost of those crowns. Our collective histories are often curated to hide the grotesque realities that underpin the grandeur. Aurelius was embalmed, yes, preserved for posterity in a jar of formaldehyde. But it was not his regal visage that was immortalized. Instead, it was the monstrous emblem of his heinous, deformed, outsized secret, preserved, honored, protected. The very thing that no one dared speak aloud became the symbol of everything wrong with royalty. Grotesque, unwieldy, and impossible to bear, yet enshrined as a relic of power. If this is what they called a king, what did they call a monster? His story is a mirror reflecting every kingdom and system that still cloaks its failures behind a facade of invincibility. It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths, that power can corrupt not only through action, but through silence, that the cost of preserving myths is often paid in human suffering, that history is not simply what is told, but what is concealed. In this reflection lies a challenge for us today, to see beyond the gilded surface, to question the legitimacy of inherited power, to demand histories that acknowledge pain alongside triumph, to recognize that behind every king there may be wounds and deformities, the physical, the psychological, the systemic, that shaped their rule and scarred those who lived under it. The kingdoms we inherit are not just lands or laws, they are legacies of pain, silence, and complicity. Untold Legacy dares to expose these shadows, not to destroy history, but to reclaim it, to honor those silenced, and to demand justice for truths long buried. So, there you have it. The tragic, bizarre, and ultimately cautionary tale of Ferdinand VII, a king whose personal torments and anatomical anomaly intertwined to shape a reign of destruction and despair. It's a story that reminds us how deeply personal struggles, when coupled with absolute power, can ripple outwards, impacting not just individuals, but entire nations. Ferdinand's life serves as a stark reminder that true leadership demands self-awareness, empathy, and a commitment to the greater good qualities, sadly absent in his case. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this story. What surprised you the most? What questions does it raise for you about power, history, or the human condition? Please leave a comment below. I'm really eager to hear your perspectives and keep the conversation going. And if you found this exploration into the darker corners of history fascinating, please consider subscribing to the channel. That way, you won't miss out on future deep dives into intriguing and often unsettling historical narratives. Finally, this is just the beginning. We've only scratched the surface of Ferdinand VII's reign. In Part 2, we'll be delving even deeper into the political machinations, the secret societies, and the enduring impact of his legacy. So be sure to check it out for more exciting details and deeper insights. Thanks for watching.